I finally hit the jackpot and won $10 million. But in my excitement, I slipped on a stray beer bottle and freakin' died. When I opened my eyes again, I had reincarnated as the useless heir of a washed-up, ruined noble family. Suddenly, a voice chimed in my head. Cold-hearted Empress Conquest System initiated. Host, please present flowers to the Empress. I absolutely lost my mind. Screw off. I hadn't even cashed out my $10 million, and you want me to play some stupid dating sim? This is a scam. I'm out. With no other choice, the system reluctantly compromised. If you can make the Empress fall madly in love with you, your reward will be $100 million and a ticket back home. Hey, who actually turns down that kind of cash? Game on. I will be the ultimate simp if that's what it takes. Armed with world-class strategies and modern tech, I launched a national development plan. Building infrastructure and saving the kingdom? Easy money. Soon enough, the Empress's look of pure disgust turned into absolute obsession. She was practically begging me to rule the empire right alongside her. Just as the system announced my victory and prepared to send me home, I realized only kids choose between options. The cash, the Empress. I'm keeping both. Smirking, I used my maxed out system points to rewrite the source code and force open a permanent portal between our worlds. Hey, are you the manufacturer? I need 10 excavators delivered straight to the portal coordinates. My wife needs to expand her palace. Congratulations. The lottery ticket ending in 69420 has successfully hit the top prize this period. Your payout is $10 million. Looking at that massive string of zeros on my phone screen, I was so pumped I could jump around in joy. I'm rich. I never have to act like a corporate slave for that balding boss of mine ever again. Luxury cars, exclusive clubs, a massive mansion. I've finally made it. In my pure excitement, I chugged a huge gulp of beer. Just as I was about to jump onto my bed to pull off a celebratory backflip, my foot slipped right on a stray rolling beer bottle. The back of my head slammed hard into the rusty corner of my metal desk. A wave of agonizing pain hit me, and my vision went completely black. Damn it. I hadn't even cashed out my $10 million yet. Master. Lord Valerius, please wake up. Your father just died on the battlefield. If something happens to you too, House Valerius will be done for. A frantic, loud shaking pulled me back from the dark void. I forced my eyes open. What caught my attention was an elegant-looking but incredibly run-down ceiling, alongside a servant in historical clothing who wept so hard his face was a total mess. Suddenly, a massive flood of memories that didn't belong to me rushed into my brain. Alden Empire. The only son of the Grand Protector of House Valerius. He even shared the exact same name as me, Asher Valerius. Unfortunately, the original owner of this body was a total deadbeat, a spoiled brat who was an absolute failure at both academics and martial arts. His father had just been ambushed and killed by an enemy army at the border. Yet before his body had turned cold, his political rival, the powerful prime minister, had already sent local thugs to their front door to squeeze them dry. The original owner of this body, already completely overwhelmed by grief, was brutally beaten by those thugs and literally died of pure shock and rage. That was the only reason an unlucky bastard like me took his place. Just as I was frantically processing all this information, a sharp electronic chime suddenly echoed in my mind. Ding. Host soul detected. Cold-hearted Empress Conquest System has successfully bound to your soul. Deploying beginner quest. Proceed to the main gates of the royal palace immediately, drop to your knees, and yell, "I love you, your majesty," 3 times. Reward for success, charm plus 10. Penalty for failure, executed. I froze, completely stunned. Then, a wave of absolute fury rushed straight to my head. What the fuck? I haven't even cashed out my $10 million, and you dumped me into this godforsaken place as a total nobody? And now you want me to be a desperate simp? Screw that. Not in a million years. The system had clearly never encountered a host with such a fiery temper. Its mechanical voice glitched and sputtered for a second. Host, please calm down. The system is designed to mold you into the perfect heartthrob. As long as you win over the Empress. Shut up. I'm a highly sought-after Ivy League graduate. I'm not some brain-dead main character from a trashy romance novel. Send me back right now, or we can both go down together. I refused to back down an inch, immediately channeling the exact energy of a miserable corporate slave absolutely ready to throw hands with a toxic HR manager. Right at that moment, a loud bang shattered the air as the front gates of the estate were violently kicked open. Several burly, scar-faced thugs carrying wooden clubs barged into the courtyard. The leader, a guy with a nasty scar across his face, spat on the ground and shouted arrogantly, "Is that useless Valerius kid dead yet? If you're still breathing, hurry up and hand over the deed to this estate." The Prime Minister made it clear, as of today, House Valerius is history. I stared at the bunch of mobsters, and the fury building up inside me finally found an outlet. "Run, Lord Asher," my servant cried out, collapsing to the ground in pure terror. Run? My $10 million lottery prize was gone, and I was desperately looking for something to take my anger out on. I grabbed a heavy brick from the courtyard that had been bracing the leg of an old table. My gaze turned ice cold as I marched straight toward them. Even though the original owner of this body was rather useless, he at least had taken basic lessons in martial arts. Taking on a few street thugs was a complete walk in the park. "You little punk, you're asking for," Scarface didn't even get to finish his sentence. I slid to the side, dodging his swing, and slammed the brick smack into his face with perfect precision. Scarface shrieked and hit the dirt. The remaining thugs froze in shock, but I didn't give them a single second to react. I snatched away one of their wooden clubs and started swinging, aiming directly for their joints and below the belt. Within 30 seconds, the entire crew of hooligans was lying on the ground, groaning and rolling around in agony. I stomped my foot hard right on Scarface's chest, pointing the blood-soaked club right at his nose. "Go back and tell that garbage prime minister of yours that if he even touches a single brick of House Valerius' estate, I will dig up his ancestors' graves. Now get the hell out of here." I threw the club aside, took a deep breath, and spoke coldly in my mind. "Hey system, did you catch that? I only believe in clearing obstacles by force. I'm not following some simp game's rules. If you want me to do your dirty work, you better rewrite the rules." The system went completely silent for a full minute before it finally caved. Strong will detected from the host. Modifying core logic. Modification complete. New mission issued. Host, please display your legendary governing talents to make the Alden Empire exceptionally powerful, prompting the Empress to fall for you naturally. Ultimate victory reward, a guaranteed ticket back home and a direct transfer of $100 million into your bank account. The second I heard $100 million, my eyes practically lit up with greed. Deal. Call me a simp all you want. I slapped my knee in pure excitement. Forget making the Empress fall in love with me, I would literally stay up all night tiling every single floor of her palace for that kind of money. That $100 million prize is as good as mine. Now that the goal of building an empire, getting filthy rich, and returning to my world was set, I started planning my opening move. My father of this world died in battle, and his military power had been completely stripped away by the corrupt Prime Minister, Victor Hoyle. Following in his footsteps in the military was a dead end for me now. The Alden Empire heavily favored scholars over warriors, meaning that if I wanted to turn the tables and get close to the cold, aloof Empress Catherine Alden, there was only one path forward, the Imperial Governor selection. Lord Asher, you'll be participating in the Imperial Governor selection? My servant, Tobias, watched me pack up the last 2 valuable vases in the estate to sell them for ink and paper. His jaw practically hit the floor. "But you can't even read the most basic books." "Quiet, you know nothing. This is what we call knowledge changing your destiny," I replied without even looking up as I prepared the writing instruments. On the night before the results were released, a crowd of noble heirs gathered at the capital's finest saloon, sipping wine and reciting poetry. The moment I walked in, the Prime Minister's arrogant nephew sneered at me in a mocking tone. Well, if it isn't the useless heir of House Valerius. What's the matter? Did you realize you're no good with a sword, so you came to embarrass yourself in front of real scholars? Ha ha ha. If a loser like him passes the exam, I will literally eat this entire wooden table right here. The whole room erupted into roars of laughter. I didn't even bother giving them a glance. As I walked past their table, I casually dropped a single line. "Make sure you scrub that table clean first. I'd hate for you to get food poisoning when you eat it." Honestly, getting to the final round of the exam was a total nail-biter. After all, I'm from the modern age, so my historical writing skills looked like straight dog water. But hey, I played it smart. Years of surviving the modern school system wasn't just for show. Even though the examiners roasted my writing style as utterly crude and unrefined, the management concepts I threw in were so far ahead of their time that I literally clutched my way into the final round of the selection. On the day of the final round, I finally saw her, the legendary cold-hearted Empress, Catherine Alden. She was breathtakingly gorgeous but completely aloof. There was a deep, unshakable exhaustion written all over her face. The Alden Empire was dealing with disaster on both the domestic and international fronts, and the treasury was so broke it was growing cobwebs. Lately, the treasury has been running on empty, and our border troops are facing severe supply shortages, the Empress's crisp, cool voice echoed through the Grand Hall. Do any of my ministers have a real plan to bring in funding? Prime Minister, Victor Hoyle, immediately stepped forward. Your Majesty, I believe we should raise the agricultural taxes on the peasants while cutting back on all unnecessary spending. The rest of the court officials nodded along like mindless drones, spouting nothing but pure, useless filler. A flash of disappointment crossed Catherine's eyes as her gaze swept over our group of top candidates. What about the rest of you? I took a deep breath and stepped right out of the lineup. Your Majesty, I think Prime Minister Hoyle's plan is absolute garbage. It's short-sighted and completely brain-dead. The second those words left my mouth, the entire hall gasped. Victor practically shook with pure rage. Watch your mouth. You're just a clueless kid. What do you know about running a country? I let out a cold laugh. Raising taxes on the peasants will only cause them to lose everything. It'll ruin families, and ultimately spark a massive revolution. However, I have a real strategy. I threw my shoulders back, delivering a loud, confident pitch that blended modern macroeconomics with historical insights. First, we completely scrapped the poll tax and switched to a land acreage tax system. We will tax people based on the actual size of the property they own. That will force the wealthy, elite families who hide their massive estates to finally cough up the money they've been hoarding. Second, we implement a tax leverage. We will place hefty luxury taxes on the mega-rich merchants while lowering taxes on agriculture and small businesses. This will encourage trade and funnel tax money to support our farmers. Third, we issue government bonds. The crown borrows money from wealthy businessmen, backed by the credit of the empire, and promises interest returns. It turns stagnant money into active capital. The entire hall went dead silent. The scholars who usually loved talking in fancy circles just stood there completely shell-shocked, their brains totally melting trying to process it. Victor was sweating bullets trying to find a counter-argument, but my logic was an absolute iron fortress, leaving him zero room to argue. Up on the throne, a brilliant spark erupted for the very first time in Catherine's perpetually cold eyes. She stared intensely at me. She clearly thought I was arrogant, maybe even way too obsessed with money, but every single one of those three strategies struck directly at the worst corruption plaguing the Alden Empire. Brilliant. A land acreage tax and using commercial taxes to fund the farmers. The Empress suddenly stood up, absolutely thrilled. Shutting down all objections on the spot, she loudly announced, "Asher Valerius, I am personally naming you the top candidate of this election. Effective immediately, you are appointed as the Vice Minister of Finance, with full authority to fix our national treasury." I bowed to accept the honor, my lips curving up into a smirk. Step 1 of building my empire was officially locked in. I just got a whole lot closer to that $100 million prize. I barely even had time to warm my seat as Vice Minister before an urgent report came in from the south. The southern Riverlands had just been hit by a once-in-a-century flood. The main dam had completely collapsed, leaving hundreds of thousands of civilians homeless and displaced. Right on cue in the royal court, Victor seized the opportunity to make his move. "Your Majesty, since our newly appointed Vice Minister of Finance possesses such extraordinary talent with his strategies, dealing with a little water should be a total walk in the park for him. I formally nominate Vice Minister Valerius to head south and handle the flood relief matters." That old fox was positively toxic. The National Treasury didn't have a single cent to its name, and he wanted me to fix a massive flood? This was a blatant setup to watch me fail so he could have a legitimate excuse to have me executed. Even Catherine hesitated, throwing a deeply worried glance in my direction. But I didn't even flinch. I stepped right forward, looking completely heroic. "I accept the mission, Your Majesty. If I fail to build a brand new dam within 10 days, you can take my head on a silver platter." The entire court looked at me like I was a literal dead man walking. 10 days? With zero funding and zero materials, even a miracle worker couldn't fix a broken dam. When I arrived at the disaster zone in the southern Riverlands, it was total devastation, with tragedy stretching as far as the eye could see. To make matters worse, the local corrupt officials weren't doing a single thing to help. Instead, they had actually pocketed the government's pathetic relief funds and swapped the emergency food supply with moldy, dirt-filled grains. "Sir, a traditional packed earth dam is never going to hold back a flood of this scale," the engineering official traveling with me cried out, panicking. "Who said anything about using packed earth?" I let out a cold laugh before slipping away to a quiet spot where no one could see me, and woke up the system. System, use the points I racked up from winning the Imperial Governor selection to buy me the recipe and manufacturing blueprint for old-school cement. The second I got the blueprint, I immediately drafted the local refugees into a workforce, blasting rock quarries and setting up makeshift kills. We blasted a crazy mix of limestone, clay, and iron slag together at extreme temperatures. When the first batch of dusty gray powder was mixed with water, blended with crushed stones, and poured over iron bars scavenged from an abandoned weapons vault, the craftsman genuinely thought I had lost my mind. Pouring mud straight into water was supposed to stop a flood? Fast forward 3 days later, the cement had completely cured. The engineering official took a massive sledgehammer and swung it with absolutely everything he had against the new cement barrier. It left nothing but a tiny white speck, without even a single hairline crack. Instantly, everyone gasped in awe. "It's a miracle. A literal miracle. Vice Minister Valerius must be a saint sent by God." The crowd collapsed to their knees in the dirt, weeping and reaching out toward me like I was a living saint. With the dam securely holding, it was time to settle the score. I immediately brought in soldiers to lock down the local governor's estate and dragged out all the secret ledger books hidden away in their vaults. "Vice Minister Valerius, these ledgers are incredibly messy and involve dozens of different businesses. It'll take at least 2 weeks just to make sense of all this fraud," the governor's secretary muttered, sweating bullets. 2 weeks? Please, I've mastered complex financial auditing. I could balance these books in my sleep. I had my men haul in a massive wooden board and started drawing a giant Excel spreadsheet right onto it. I introduced standard double-entry bookkeeping. Every debit must have a credit, and the two must always balance out. The corrupt officials thought they had designed the ultimate bulletproof scam, but against modern accounting, their books were absolutely riddled with massive holes. In just 3 short hours, I traced the exact destination of hundreds of thousands of stolen silver coins with absolute clarity. The local governor, who happened to be Victor's prized golden boy, was still aggressively shouting in my face. "Asher Valerius. I am the Prime Minister's personal protege. You wouldn't dare touch me. You're exactly the one I'm looking for." I drew the legendary imperial sword Catherine had gifted me before the trip and swung it without hesitation. With a clean slice, his head rolled right across the floor. Open the vaults. Distribute the food. Seize every single asset belonging to these corrupt politicians and funnel it directly into disaster relief. I stripped off my fancy court official robes, threw on basic clothes, and jumped straight into the muddy water to carry sandbags alongside the refugees to reinforce the levee. What I didn't realize was that on a nearby hillside, a slender figure wearing a hooded cloak was quietly watching my every move. It was Catherine. She had slipped out of the palace incognito because she was too anxious about the disaster to stay behind. She watched the guy who usually acted like a total slacker in the royal court, now completely covered in mud with bloodshot eyes, confidently taking command in the middle of a torrential downpour. Catherine felt her heart skip a beat. Ding. Alert, Empress Catherine Alden's affection levels are skyrocketing. Current affection, 60%. Hearing the ping echo in my head while standing in the freezing mud, I wiped a splash of dirt off my face and flashed a massive grin. With the Southern Riverlands crisis officially solved, I made a triumphant return to the capital, bringing back millions of silver coins confiscated directly from the corrupt officials. The national treasury went from dead broke to completely loaded in a single day, and the way Catherine looked at me was so intense she could burn a hole through me. But Victor was now completely backed into a corner. He knew with absolute certainty that the second I secured my political position, he was a dead man. So, taking advantage of the fact that the main imperial army had been deployed to the borders to keep the barbarian tribes at bay, the old traitor teamed up with foreign spies and launched a massive coup right in the capital. A rebel army of 100,000 men, made up of Victor's private forces and bribed capital guards, marched forward and completely surrounded the royal palace. Meanwhile, the total number of loyal troops left to defend the capital was barely 10,000 men. Catherine stood tall with a long sword in hand, fully prepared to go down with her country like a true ruler. Asher Valerius, she said, suddenly walking up to me. Her voice trembled slightly, her eyes filled with a heavy, devastating mix of longing and pure finality. I have ordered my elite guards to escort you out of the city through a secret underground tunnel. I froze, completely stunned. What about you, your majesty? I am the ruler of the Alden Empire, and I will not run away. Catherine's eyes welled with tears as she suddenly reached out and pulled me into a tight, desperate hug, her tears soaking right through my shoulder. As long as you stay alive, the Empire still has a future. If there is a next life. I don't want to be the Empress anymore. I just want to be your wife. Her tears were warm against my collar, soaking straight through the rough linen of my shirt. For all her icy demeanor in court, Catherine Alden was barely 22 years old. She had inherited a hollowed-out empire, an empty treasury, and a viper's nest of corrupt aristocrats waiting to strip her flesh from the bone. Now, with 100,000 rebel soldiers battering down the gates of the capital, the mighty Empress was shaking in my arms. Ding. Alert, target Catherine Alden's emotional barrier completely shattered. Current affection, 88%. Warning, hostile forces have breached the outer Meridian Wall. Time until inner palace collapse, 45 minutes. Leave through the tunnel? I chuckled softly, my hands coming up to rest firmly on her shoulders. I pushed her back just enough to look into those wide, amber eyes. Your Majesty, I didn't spend the last 2 months balancing your books, mixing cement with my bare hands, and executing your crooked governors just to run away like a rat in a sewer. Catherine's breath hitched. Asher, you don't understand the numbers. Victor. Hoyle has 3 private legions, 5 regiments of the capital garrison, and thousands of cells words. We have less than 8,000 loyal palace guards left. The gates will not hold. Then we don't let them fight on the gates, I said, a vicious smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. We invite them into a slaughterhouse. I turned inward, slamming my consciousness into the system's interface. System. Open the Prestige Exchange store immediately. Acknowledged. Host currently possesses 45,800 Imperial Development Points. Earned from the Southern Flood Relief and Fiscal Reforms. What would you like to purchase? Give me the optimized recipe for granulated corn black powder, the structural schematics for cast iron blast mines, and 20 barrels of distilled sulfur naphtha accelerant. Deposit the materials directly into the Royal Armory. Vault under Imperial Requisition Authority. Deducting 30,000 points. Knowledge synthesized. Materials materialized in the designated quadrant. I grabbed Catherine's hand, pulling her toward the central courtyard where the remaining palace guards stood assembled. They were battered, bloodied, and terrified, clutching standard-issue iron spears and notched longswords. Tobias. I barked. My servant, who had somehow managed to survive by sticking to my shadow with a butcher knife white-knuckled in his fist, snapped to attention. Why yes, Lord. Asher. Gather 50 of the most level-headed craftsmen from the armory. Bring every clay jar, iron cauldron, and scrap iron fragment from the palace smithy to the western courtyard gate. Move. Within 20 minutes, under the torrential downpour of the midnight rain, I turned the western courtyard into an engineering death trap. The traditional black powder of this world was crude, a loose, sluggish dust that produced more white smoke than explosive force. What I brewed using the system's formulation was corn powder, moist mixed, compressed into dense cakes, dried, and ground into uniform grains, packed tightly inside ceramic amphras along with jagged nails, severed iron chain links, and sulfur naphtha fluid. Each vessel was effectively a high-yield fragmentation mine. Boom! The main gate of the inner palace groaned as a massive timber battering ram slammed into the reinforced ironwood. Wood splinters flew like shrapnel. Outside, the arrogant roar of Victor Hoyle echoed over the thunder. Catherine, surrender the imperial seal and take your own life with dignity. Lay down your arms, and I will let your useless pet Asher die with an intact corpse. Catherine drew her sword, the steel singing in the cold air. Her knuckles were white, but her gaze had regained its razor-sharp imperial edge. She looked at me, nodding once. Let them in, I whispered to the gate captain. Lord Valerius. The captain gasped in horror. If we open the gate. I said open the damn gate. Unbar the chains, fall back 50 paces, and take cover behind the cement barricades. The heavy iron bolts were drawn. The gates swung violently inward under the weight of the charging vanguard. Hundreds of heavily armored rebel shock troops poured through the breach, their shields raised, howling like a pack of starving wolves smelling blood. Victor Hoyle's nephew rode near the front on a massive warhorse, waving his broadsword. Kill them all. The throne belongs to House Hoyle. Eat shit. I shouted from the balcony above. I dropped a burning brand straight onto the primary fuse line running along the stone pavers. The fire hissed through the powder train at blinding speed, snaking directly beneath the feet of the first 3 rebel battalions. For a fraction of a second, the courtyard went dead silent. Then, hell woke up. Kaboom! A shockwave of concussive force and orange fire ripped through the enclosed courtyard. The ground bucked like an earthquake. The sound was not a mere crash, it was a world-shattering roar that tore the eardrums of every man within 300 yards. Thousands of iron nails and shrapnel tore through steel armor as if it were parchment. Men, horses, and stone tiles were launched 20 feet into the air. In a blinding flash of sulfur and fire, the shockwave blew the inner palace windows to dust and collapsed the stone archway of the gate directly onto the heads of the advancing rebel reinforcements. The screams that followed were unearthly. Victor's nephew and his entire vanguard of 1,200 elite shock troops were obliterated in under 3 seconds. The surviving rebels at the edge of the blast froze, paralyzed by pure, unadulterated primal terror. In an era of swords and bows, this was not warfare, this was the wrath of an angry god. Crossbowman. Catherine's voice cut through the ringing silence like a whip. Her eyes blazed with magnificent fury. Fire. From the reinforced bastions I had thrown together using fast-setting cement, 500 royal marksmen unleashed a devastating volley into the choked, panicked mass of rebels trapped in the bottleneck. I snatched a repeating hand ballista loaded with explosive bolt heads, aimed directly into the dust cloud at the rear, and pulled the trigger. Crack. Boom. The rebel lines broke. Men threw down their weapons, trampling over one another in a frantic, screaming frenzy to get away from the flaming ruin of the courtyard. Monster. He's a demon. The Valerius brat commands hellfire. Retreat. Fall back. Stand your ground, you cowards. Victor Hoyle screamed from his carriage. Outside the palace walls, his face pale as a corpse, his aristocratic composure entirely shattered. It's a trick. It's sorcery. He cannot do it again. Oh, really? I stepped out onto the shattered parapet of the gate, looking down at the fleeing mob. Beside me, Catherine stood shoulder to shoulder, the royal banner snapping violently in the wind behind her. Victor Hoyle. I roared, my voice amplified by an iron cone trumpet. Your coup is over. Throw down your sword and crawl on your belly, or the next thing I vaporize will be your entire family clan. The dawn rose over the capital not with the triumphant banners of House Hoyle, but with the cold stench of soot, blood, and burnt sulfur. By midday, the rebellion had entirely collapsed. When the regular army stationed at the northern border received word, relayed through a series of smoke signal telegraph stations I had set up along the main highway 3 weeks prior, their elite cavalry rode day and night, cutting off Victor's escape route to the sea. The Prime Minister was dragged into the grand imperial throne room by his iron-collared neck, his lavish silk robe stained with mud and urine. The grand court was packed with every remaining noble, minister, and military commander in the capital. But this time, nobody dared to whisper. Nobody dared To mock the useless heir of House Valerius. They stood against the pillars, trembling, their eyes darting nervously toward me as I sat comfortably in a carved mahogany chair placed just one step below the imperial throne. Your Majesty. Spare me. Victor Hoyle sobbed, his forehead slamming against the marble floor until blood pooled on the tiles. I was misled. The foreign ambassadors from the Western empires coerced me. I have served Alden for 40 years. 40 years of leeching the blood from our people. Catherine's voice was as cold as a glacial blade. She sat upon the golden throne, dressed in an imperial dragon robe of deep crimson and gold. But instead of the exhausted, hesitant monarch she had been a month ago, her posture was imperial, resolute, and completely unyielding. Victor Hoyle, for the crimes of high treason, murdering the late Grand Protector Valerius, embezzling 3 million gold sovereigns from the national granaries, and attempting to usurp the throne, your lineage is stripped of all titles. All assets belonging to the top 18 aristocratic families involved in the coup are forfeit to the imperial treasury. She paused, turning her gaze toward me. The frosty chill in her eyes instantly melted into an unmistakable, deeply intimate warmth. Lord Asher Valerius, step forward. I rose, smoothing out the wrinkles on my dark court robe, and stepped to the center of the dais. Present, Your Majesty. For saving the crown from ruin, annihilating the rebel host, and stabilizing the realm's foundations, Catherine announced, her voice echoing with absolute authority across the silent hall, I appoint you Grand Chancellor of the Alden Empire and Supreme Commander of all military and economic affairs. Your word carries the weight of my own imperial seal. The entire court gasped, but not a single person had the courage to squeak an objection. The smell of gun smoke still lingered on my clothes. Furthermore, Catherine's pale cheeks blushed with a faint, intoxicating shade of rose, though her tone remained completely regal. House Valerius shall be restored to the rank of Grand Ducal royalty. The Grand Chancellor shall have the privilege of entering the imperial chambers without prior announcement. Ding. Target Catherine Alden's affection has reached 95%. Imperial stability restored, plus 50,000 development points. Host is within striking distance of the ultimate victory condition. That evening, the Grand Chancellor's newly restored estate was quiet, but I was not sleeping. I sat at a broad desk covered in blueprint rolls, dipping a steel-nibbed pen into ink. If I was going to push Catherine's affection to the absolute maximum 100% and claim that $100 million ticket back to Earth, I had to leave behind an empire so powerful that nobody could ever threaten her again. A soft click sounded at the study door. I didn't even have to look up to recognize the faint scent of jasmine and cold mint. Shouldn't the Empress of Alden be resting after surviving a coup? I asked, sketching the valve assembly for a low-pressure steam boiler. Catherine walked in silently. She had shed her heavy imperial regalia, wearing only a simple white silk dress that hugged her slender frame, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked less like a ruler and more like a strikingly beautiful woman in love. She walked behind my chair, resting her slender, cool hands gently on my shoulders. I couldn't sleep, she whispered, leaning down until her lips brushed against my ear. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the explosions, and I see the moment you stepped between me and the rebel vanguard. I told you, I'm good at solving problems, I said, leaning my head back against her chest. Catherine wrapped her arms around my neck, resting her chin on the top of my head. The ministers are already drafting petitions for our formal betrothal. They know where the real power in this empire lies. Oh. And what does Her Majesty think about that? She bit her lower lip, turning me around by my shoulders so she could look straight into my eyes. In the warm candlelight, her expression was breathtaking. I think that if you dare to leave me, Asher Valerius, I will mobilize every legion, build 1,000 ships, and scour every corner of the known world until I drag you back to this throne. Her heart was beating frantically against my palm as I reached up to cup her cheek. Ding. Alert, target Catherine Alden's affection, 98%. I smiled softly. Don't worry, Catherine. When I make an investment, I never leave half empty. Over the next 6 months, the Alden Empire underwent a transformation that baffled every historian, foreign spy, and neighboring monarch on the continent. With Victor Hoyle and his corrupt faction wiped out, their hoarded wealth, over 20 million ounces of silver and land deeds covering millions of acres, flooded back into the public purse. I didn't let that capital sit rotting in a vault. I put it to work with the cold, ruthless efficiency of a modern hedge fund manager. First came the Valerius industrial base. Outside the capital, 3 massive blast furnaces rose into the sky, belching gray smoke as they utilized the Bessemer process I unlocked from the system store. Instead of brittle, uneven wrought iron, the empire began churning out thousands of tons of high-grade structural steel every single week. The blacksmiths who used to spend weeks hand-hammering a single breastplate were retrained into assembly line machinists. Standardized steel plate armor, precision machined gears, and interchangeable rifle components rolled off the lines like sausages from a grinder. Second came the agricultural revolution. I distributed high-yield 4-field crop rotation manuals, imported synthetic fertilizer formula synthesized from local saltpeter and lime deposits, and manufactured thousands of steel-tipped plows. Grain yields tripled in a single harvest season. For the first time in 3 centuries, the commoners of Alden weren't starving during the winter freeze. Third was logistics and communication. Crushed stone macadamized roads, coated with durable cement, cut through the empire's provinces like straight gray arteries. Along these roads, simple optical semaphore towers and primitive galvanic telegraph wires were strung up, connecting the border forts to the imperial capital in a matter of minutes, rather than weeks. The neighboring Western Ironspire Empire, seeing Alden's rapid rise, grew terrified. Hoping to crush us before the new order solidified, Ironspire assembled a coalition of 3 border kingdoms, marching an army of 200,000 heavy cavalry and armored knights toward our western border. They expected a glorious medieval showdown of chivalry, broadswords, and cavalry charges. What they got was modern warfare. Catherine and I rode out to the western frontier together at the head of the newly reformed Imperial Vanguard, an army of just 30,000 men. When the Ironspire coalition deployed their glittering line of 5-ton war elephants and heavy cataphract knights, the allied commanders laughed. The Alden lines were tiny, standing behind long, muddy ditches without a single heavy cavalry squadron in sight. Charge, the Ironspire king roared, raising his jeweled halberd. Trample them into the dirt. 2 miles away, standing atop a steel-reinforced observation tower, I casually raised my binoculars, checked the wind speed, and tapped the telegraph operator on the shoulder. Battery 1 through 12. High explosive shells. Range, 2,000 yards. Fire at will. Tum. 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 72 rifled breech-loading field artillery pieces, cast from Bessemer steel and firing standardized percussion shells, opened up simultaneously. The earth along the charging cavalry lines didn't just shake, it erupted into a wall of pure fire, smoke, and screaming iron. Whole squadrons of armored knights vanished into vapor before they even covered half the distance. When the shell-shocked remnants of the coalition army finally stumbled within 200 yards of our trenches, they were met by 3 ranks of Alden soldiers armed with bolt-action needle guns, firing 15 rounds a minute in disciplined, rolling volleys. The entire battle was over in 45 minutes. The Ironspire king, his crown lost in the mud and his legendary army shattered, without ever getting within sword reach of an Alden soldier, surrendered on his knees before Catherine's warhorse. Catherine sat tall in her custom-tailored steel breastplate, looking down at the defeated monarch with sovereign grace. Then, in front of 30,000 cheering imperial soldiers, she turned her horse, rode straight to where I stood, and dismounted. She walked up to me, took off her gauntlet, and wrapped her arms around my neck, kissing me deeply in full view of the entire imperial army. The roar of 30,000 soldiers shook the very sky. Ding! Congratulations. Target Catherine Alden's affection has reached 100%. Absolute devotion/soulbound love. Main quest, conquest of the cold-hearted Empress completed. Reward unlocked, direct bank transfer of $100 million to host's original account. Interdimensional extraction sequence. Will initiate in 10 minutes. Please prepare for departure. A brilliant blue countdown timer materialized in the center of my field of vision. 9 minutes and 59 seconds, 9 minutes and 58 seconds, 9 minutes and 57 seconds. The noise of the cheering soldiers seemed to fade into a muffled hum. My heart thumped violently against my ribs. $100 million. That was more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I could buy a penthouse in Manhattan, a private island in the Caribbean, a fleet of supercars, and never have to look at a corporate spreadsheet again. I looked at Catherine. She was looking back at me with absolute adoration, her cheeks flushed, her fingers gently intertwined with mine. She had already announced our imperial wedding for the coming spring. She had given me absolute authority over an empire spanning 3 million square miles. If I vanished right now, she would be left alone in a world that would never truly understand the machinery I had built. She would spend the rest of her life searching for a ghost system. I spoke in my mind, my voice chillingly calm. Host, the extraction protocol is automated. Your physical vessel in this realm will experience sudden cardiac cessation, and your consciousness will be Reconstructed in your original world at the exact moment prior to the accident. With your bank balance updated. Let me ask you something, I said, bringing up the master console. How many unspent prestige and development points do I currently possess? Host currently possesses 842,000 Imperial development points from modernizing agriculture, introducing modern medicine, building the telegraph network, and conquering the Iron Spire Coalition. And what is the structural architecture of your system based on? Dimensional energy resonance, correct? Host does not have clearance to query core system architecture. Screw your clearance. I'm an Ivy League engineer with a master's in applied physics, and I just spent a year building a modern nation from scrap. I grinned, my fingers flashing through the mental terminal. I'm not choosing between my money and my woman. Only idiot children make binary choices. I want the $100 million, and I want Catherine Alden. I'm keeping both. Warning. Host is attempting an unauthorized logic override. System source. Code error. Warning. Unauthorized variable injection. Spend all 842,000 points right now. Overload the extraction anchor. Do not dismantle the interdimensional bridge, reforge it into a permanent, two-way spatial gateway between my apartment on Earth and the Imperial bedchamber of Alden. The system's mechanical voice sputtered, descending into a frantic cascade of digital static, error, logical contradiction. Host wants to leave and stay. Points deducting. 100,000, 400,000, 800,000, dimensional coordinates. Locking. World A, Earth, 40.7128 degrees north, 74.0060 degrees west, equals World B, Alden Empire. Imperial Palace Central Vault, dot. Spatial stability coefficient, 100%. Master. Key assigned to host's biometric signature. Override successful. Host is insane. System resigning in protest. Extraction in 3, 2, 1. A blinding white light swallowed my vision. Gasp. I sat bolt upright, coughing violently. The smell of cheap instant noodles, stale beer, and damp carpet hit my nostrils. I was sitting on the floor of my cramped, 20-square-meter studio apartment in Queens. On the desk in front of me, the corner of the rusty metal frame was completely dry. No blood. Buzz. Buzz. My cracked smartphone on the mattress started vibrating like crazy. I scrambled over and grabbed it, unlocking the screen with trembling fingers. A text notification from Chase Bank flashed across the screen. Direct deposit alert, wire transfer of $100 million. 00 from Valerius Global Holdings Corp. Has cleared. Available balance, $100,042.15. I stared at the screen for 10 straight seconds. Then, I burst into a fit of wild, unrestrained laughter that probably made my downstairs neighbors think I had finally lost my mind. It worked. It actually freaking worked. I closed my eyes and focused on the center of my consciousness. A faint, glowing golden rune hovered behind my eyelids. With a single mental command, a shimmering, swirling blue oval portal, roughly 8 feet high, silently unfolded in the middle of my tiny living room. Through the translucent blue shimmer, I could clearly see the lavish silk curtains, the carved sandalwood furniture, and the grand marble columns of the Imperial Palace of Alden. On the other side of the portal, Catherine was pacing back and forth, her hand on the hilt of her sword, looking visibly anxious. Catherine, I called out softly. She spun around, her eyes widening in pure shock as she stared at the glowing portal, and at me, sitting on a squeaky modern folding chair in a gray hoodie and sweatpants. Asher? She stepped closer to the shimmering boundary, reaching out a trembling hand. Her fingers passed smoothly through the blue light, touching my cheek. Her eyes instantly filled with tears of relief. Where are you? What is this realm? What strange clothes are those? Welcome to my home world, babe, I chuckled, kissing her palm. Give me 48 hours. I need to do some shopping. Our new Imperial expansion plan is about to get a serious upgrade. 2 days later. An abandoned 3-acre industrial logistics warehouse in New Jersey, which I had purchased in full for $4.5 million cash within 12 hours through an elite private broker, was humming with activity. I stood in the center of the vast concrete floor, wearing a high-visibility construction vest and a pair of designer sunglasses, holding a clipboard. Outside the loading bay, 6 massive heavy-duty flatbed transport trucks from Caterpillar and Komatsu were idling, their diesel engines rumbling deep and low. The site manager, a burly middle-aged guy with a thick Brooklyn accent, walked up to me, scratching his hard hat in total confusion. Look, Mr. Valerius. The check cleared, and your money is greener than anyone else's, but I gotta ask. You ordered 10 hydraulic crawler excavators, 4 Caterpillar road graders, 2,000 rolls of industrial geotextile membrane, and 8 heavy-duty diesel generators, and you told us to just drive M inside this empty warehouse and leave M here? That's correct, I smiled, handing him a fat stack of $100 bills as an on-the-spot tip. My private shipping crew will handle the cross-border transport tonight. You and your drivers can clock out early. The manager looked at the empty warehouse, shrugged, took the cash, and whistled to his crew. All right, boys. Drop the ramps, unload the cats, and let's go get some beer. 30 minutes later, the warehouse was dead quiet, save for the ticking of cooling metal engines. 10 massive, yellow and black 30-ton industrial excavators, their hydraulic arms gleaming with raw power, sat neatly lined up on the concrete floor alongside pallets of diesel barrels, solar arrays, and high-tensile steel cables. I walked to the center of the warehouse, took a deep breath, and snapped my fingers. Whoosh. The spatial rune flared. The 8-foot portal rapidly expanded, tearing open the fabric of space until it formed a massive, 60-foot wide gateway of pure sapphire light connecting the concrete floor of the New Jersey warehouse directly to the Grand Southern Parade grounds of the Alden Imperial Palace. On the other side, 10,000 Imperial Guards, 500 court ministers, and Catherine herself stood waiting. I climbed up into the cabin of the lead excavator, cranked the heavy diesel engine to life with a satisfying, ground-shaking roar, and pushed the dual throttle levers forward. The steel tracks clattered against the concrete as I drove the 30-ton steel beast straight through the shimmering portal. Ruyumble. When the massive yellow machine emerged onto the marble flagstones of the Imperial courtyard, exhaust puffing from its stack and steel treads crushing a path of modern industrial might, the entire Alden court lost their collective minds. Ministers collapsed to their knees in sheer terror, thinking I had summoned a mythical metal dragon. The Imperial guards dropped their spears, trembling in awe. I pushed open the cabin door, jumped down from the track, and walked over to Catherine, who was staring at the machine with wide, sparkling eyes. What is that majestic beast? She asked, her voice filled with wonder as she reached out to touch the cold, industrial yellow painted steel. That, my Empress, I smirked, wrapping an arm around her waist, is a modern earth mover. With 10 of these, we can build your new Grand Canal in 3 months instead of 20 years. And that's just the beginning. I pulled out my smartphone, connected via satellite uplink to the generator on the other side of the portal, and dialed a number. Hey, is this the heavy industrial manufacturer? Yeah, this is Asher Valerius. I need 20 more excavators, 50 dump trucks, and 10,000 tons of reinforced rebar delivered to my New Jersey facility by next Tuesday. My wife's palace needs an expansion. 3 years later, the capital of the Alden Empire had become a city unlike anything this world, or mine, had ever witnessed. It was a breathtaking fusion of ancient imperial grandeur and clean, hyper-advanced modern engineering. The grand palace walls were now illuminated by soft, warm LED floodlights, powered by rooftop solar grids and hydroelectric turbines along the southern river. Paved 4-lane asphalt highways stretched from the capital to the farthest corners of the continent, traversed by heavy diesel logistics trucks and streamlined steam-electric locomotives. The old diseases that once ravaged the population were virtually eradicated, thanks to modern antibiotics and clean municipal water filtration plants. The Alden Empire's literacy rate hit 90%, backed by modern printing presses and a standardized public education curriculum that taught both classical philosophy and modern mathematics. Every neighboring kingdom, from the frozen steppes of the north to the desert sultanates of the east, had willingly signed treaties of protectorate vassalage, begging to be connected to the Alden rail network and economic sphere. And in my original world, Valerius Global Conglomerate had become the world's most mysterious and lucrative megacorporation. Nobody knew where Valerius Global sourced its impossibly pure, flawless 500-carat diamonds, its pristine uncut emeralds, or its unprecedented reserves of rare earth minerals and ancient medicinal herbs that could cure terminal illnesses. Wall Street analysts tore their hair out trying to understand my supply chain, while heads of state practically begged for private meetings. On a warm Friday evening in Manhattan, in the penthouse suite atop a 90-story skyscraper overlooking Central Park, the living room air was filled with the soft hum of modern luxury. A shimmering blue spatial gate opened silently beside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Catherine stepped through. She wasn't wearing her heavy imperial dragon robes or her battle armor. Instead, she wore a bespoke, emerald green silk evening gown from a Parisian haute couture house, her diamond necklace sparkling beneath the chandelier, her long, dark hair styled in an elegant modern updo. She walked gracefully to the edge of the glass, looking out over the sea of glittering neon skyscrapers and the endless streams of yellow cabs below. I will never get tired of this view, she whispered, leaning her head against my shoulder as I handed her a glass of chilled champagne. Better than the view from the imperial balcony? I teased, wrapping an arm around her waist. Different, Catherine smiled, turning in my arms and taking a sip of the wine. In Alden, I look out over my empire. But here, I look out over the world that made the man who conquered me. Conquered you? I chuckled. I seem to remember the system telling me I had to be your loyal simp. You are my Grand Chancellor, my co-emperor, and my husband, Catherine said, her amber eyes glowing with infinite warmth and love. She pulled me down by my collar, pressing her lips against mine with the same fiery passion that had once defied an army of 100,000 rebels. When we finally parted, she rested her forehead against mine, a playful, mischievous smirk curving her lips. By the way, Chancellor Valerius. Yes, Your Majesty. The Ministry of Works informed me this morning that the railway tunnel through the Western Dragonback Mountains is ahead of schedule. But our daughter insists that she wants an air-conditioned bullet train for her 7th birthday. I laughed out loud, raising my glass to the sparkling skyline of New York City and the eternal empire waiting just beyond the portal. Consider it done, my Empress. In this world and the next, your word is my command.